sharing nice? Look at this place, a big public park.
It's a big space where anyone can come. No one person owns this. Everyone shares it.
Sharing is caring. It can be fun.
It feels good, just like this children's song makes you feel good about sharing.
Sharing is caring. It can be fun.
And when I asked,
What's better, public or private?
most people said,
Well, obviously public.
If it were private, they'd probably charge you a fee for looking.
Wouldn't you say public? Otherwise we wouldn't be here right now, right?
But wait, is that true?
supermarkets are private, so are churches, but both are more accessible to the public than, say, public schools. Also, public sometimes isn't very nice.
What comes to mind when you hear the words public toilet?
Oh, well, that's gross.
That's gross.
Yes, this is the image I have of public toilets. And my town's public parks, including this one, used to look gross too. Garbage everywhere, buildings covered with graffiti, fields bare of grass.
Sharing is not necessarily caring. Sharing can mean neglect. But then, why is this park now so nice? Because it's under new management, private management.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But that goes against what people expect.
This is actually a privately managed park.
Really? I did notice last week when I was here, they have awesome toilets.
Yes, even the toilets are better.
Great toilet because they clean it very nicely.
Because when you own something, you take care of it. When no one owns it, nobody takes care of it. Nobody washes a rental car.
People destroy other common property, like much of the world's rainforests. American settlers nearly killed all the buffalo. Now we're overfishing the oceans.
When everyone owns a resource, no one really cares about it. No one really takes care of it. It's called the tragedy of the commons. And that's our show tonight.
And now, the man who shatters conventional wisdom, John Stossel.
We like the idea of sharing, communal property, but it does lead to what economists call the tragedy of the commons. It's a tragedy because nasty things happen when everyone owns something. I first heard that phrase in a story about some shepherds who lived around a grassy area they called a commons. Since all the shepherds shared this free green grass, they grabbed as much of it as possible. They kept breeding sheep and bringing many more sheep to graze, but soon all the grass was gone. The sheep died, and the shepherds had nothing. So then they divided the commons into parcels. Now each shepherd owned one. Each had an incentive to limit the number of sheep that grazed on his grass. Prosperity happened, and everyone lived happily ever after. Okay, it's not quite that simple usually, but we should think about this today on Thanksgiving. This week, school children were taught it's a day of sharing. The Pilgrims and the Indians shared the fruits of the harvest, but that misses the point. I assume most of their teachers don't even know that thanks to sharing, the Pilgrims almost starved. George Mason University economist Russ Roberts knows the real Thanksgiving story. So, Russ, what's the real story?
Well, there's an important lesson we learned from the Pilgrims, which was when they first came to this country, they thought it'd be nice to share. So they had communal property. They had a big area that they farmed, and their idea was...
The corporation actually ordered them to share.
Yeah, we're going to work on this together, and then we'll divvy it up equally. Well, that first winter was pretty harsh, and it was cold, and a lot of them got sick. They were in a new place. But they also didn't grow much food. They didn't grow much food for two reasons. One was, if everybody's working together, there's a tendency to shirk. You say, well, let the other guy do it. I'll still get my share. Similarly, on the other end, when the stuff grew and the harvest came, some people poached. They picked the fruit. It was corn in this case, typically. They picked the corn early, thinking, I'll get a whole ear of corn if I pick it and keep it myself in the middle of the night. Otherwise, I'm sharing it with everybody else.
I want to grab my share before the other guys
get.
Yeah,
and get a bigger share overall as a result. So their productivity in that first year was atrocious, and Governor Bradford realized this immediately after he saw what happened, that the incentives were wrong.
Governor Bradford wrote in his diary, what must they do so they might not languish thus in misery? Now, your turn. What'd they do?
So what they did is, what Governor Bradford did is he imposed the right kind of incentives on the system, which is to say, If you produce it, you get to keep it. It's really the essence of capitalism. You work hard, you produce something, it's yours. If you shirk and you're lazy, you don't get much to keep.
And in Bradford's words, they should set corn, every man for his own particular, and so assign every family a parcel of land. And this simple change took them from near starvation to enough plenty to invite the Indians in and say, let's share.
I don't think they were celebrating Thanksgiving because they'd realized that capitalism works and communal property is a failure. I think they're just happy to be alive. And I'm sure they shared with the Indians because they were probably good people to get along with. Nothing wrong with sharing. The real lesson here is what is the role of incentives? And in private property, as opposed to communal property, the incentives for hard work and stewardship to take care of the land and use it productively are there. With communal property, it's very weak.
Just owning your own stuff makes you work harder to take care of it. It's not really a surprise.
Yeah, the incentives are there for, as I said, to protect it.
But it just sounds wrong to people. It has the instinct is to say that's selfish. We want equality. We want government to take care of the important things.
Well, there's a place where communal property works pretty well, and that's my family and yours. In a family situation, because we all know each other, it's much harder to shirk. It's hard to get away with it. And usually, not always, but usually we like each other. And so I don't mind working for the other person if it's somebody I love and care about. So my wife and I don't have a shirking problem. I have a problem with the garbage. She occasionally complains about it. But in general, home life is communal, small group. If we're people who interact with each other constantly, we're going to have social norms and conventions and all kinds of ways to make sure that people do the right thing. When you get into a larger setting, that's where communal property struggles and typically fails. And the great economist Hayek understood that we have this natural urge to take the socialism of the family and expand it out to the society. Because as you say, what could be better than that? Let's take this love here and make it wider, but we aren't built that way. When we tend to spread it wider, we tend to take advantage of each other, and it leads to tyranny, actually.
Well, let's look at the rainforest. I don't think of that as tyranny, but we keep hearing they're destroying the rainforest.
Yeah, they are. Because the rainforest is public property, and as a result, if you let a tree grow larger to the height it should be, if it's on your land, you capture that benefit for yourself in the form of more wood. But if you're in a public land where you can't control who's going to come after you, you can't fence it in, it's not yours to claim and take care of, the next person who comes in cuts down that tree that you decided to bypass, and they capture it. Everybody has that incentive, and as a result, the rainforest gets butchered.
And if it were in America, people own sections of forest, and the government owns forest. And there are more forest fires on the government-owned forest. The privately owned forest, people have more incentive to take care of their wood.
To plant more and to not cut it down early. That's the biggest problem with common property. We see it with the pilgrims. They pick the corn early. We see it with fishing. You keep a small fish rather than throwing it back if it's not your pond. If it's an ocean, you throw it back, someone else is going to get it. Why should you throw it back? Keep it now. If it's your pond, let it grow to the size that it should grow. But if it's publicly owned, you worry about the other poacher coming in and taking it, so you take it now as well.
So I can understand how fish farming, private ownership of the fish, would work in some inland area, but I can't see how you do it with the ocean.
Well, the ocean's got a couple issues. With migrating fish, you can't really own the property. You could own the fish. You could have a certain tagged fish potentially with electronic surveillance and other technologies. But the way that they're solving that problem with oceans is with tuna. They're building these enormous pens it's a fish farm in the ocean. It's saltwater, briny fish, and they're somewhat free. They're not free-range tuna. They're kind of caged in, but it's kind of a big cage. They get the natural exercise that makes the fish healthier and tastier. And that's one way that technology is helping convert a public area into something private with the appropriate incentives.
You say traffic would go faster if we had private roads.
Rush hour comes from the fact that there's no incentive for the owner of the road, which is all of us. It's a beautiful thing. But the owner of the road has no incentive to maximize its productivity. And as a result, we all get stuck in traffic and complain a lot.
Finally, animals, endangered animals. What should we do about that? And bear in mind that we are on Thanksgiving.
Sure.
There's no turkey shortage.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. Some animals are scarce and some animals are plentiful. We worry about animals going extinct. We worry about endangered species. Now, here's the puzzle. If you wanted to save an animal, would you encourage people to eat it or not eat it? Well, you'd think
Don't eat.
Don't eat it. Eating makes one less. But if you can make a profit from eating it, that creates the incentive. And if you can privatize the ownership, that creates an incentive to take care of it and grow them. And so as a result, there's plenty of turkeys, plenty of chickens, and other animals are scarce because there's no incentive, unfortunately, to take care of them.
So both humans and hawks eat chickens, but the more hawks, the fewer chickens. The more humans, the more chickens.
Yeah, that was an insight of Henry George, early economist, and he understood that this nature read in tooth and claw that when more hawks, they eat the chickens, it's going to deplete the population if they get too numerous. But if we get numerous, more chickens. That is the power of incentives.
We then protect chickens, we breed chickens, we make sure we've got plenty of them.
And there's a profit to be made from growing them and taking care of them and making them healthy and eating them. If we made it illegal to sell chickens, we'd be in trouble.
Profit saves things. Thank you, Russ Roberts from George Mason University. Coming up, these animals are endangered too. What's the best way to save them? Kill them. That's right, let's kill them. Look at those buffalo roam. Bison are a great example of the tragedy of the commons. 30 million of them once roamed in America. But because no one owned them, or rather everyone owned them, Indians and the white settlers kept hunting them until they were nearly extinct. The buffalo herd went from 30 million to 1,000. But now, good news, they've made a comeback, all because now people own them. Brian Yablonsky's here to help explain what happened. What happened?
Well, property rights were established over the very few remaining bison that were left. When the bison got down to about 1,000, there were some cattle ranchers who were entrepreneurial enough to figure out that the bison were worth more alive than dead at that point. And so they went out to the Great Plains and gathered the few remnants of what was left, about 10, 15 bison, and grew them into the herds that today have led to the bison's comeback.
They protected them for their own profit.
They found a way to make the bison pay. The bison market for them was meat. They sold bison to circuses, to zoos, and to public preserves.
And before that, when there were 30 million bison, at first, there weren't enough Indians who killed them. They were doing okay. And the white settlers couldn't really get west to kill enough to endanger them.
Right. You had a commons without access to it. And right after the Civil War, when the Transcontinental Railroad was built, all of a sudden you could get hunters into the plains, and you could get the bison back to the markets in the east and overseas. That's when the real tragedy occurred.
And some people just shot them from the trains for sport.
Yeah, it was wanton waste. They weren't even collecting the bison. They were just shooting them for fun.
All right, so now we've saved the bison. What about the elephants in Africa?
Well, some of the same concepts used to save the bison have been used to save elephants in Zimbabwe. What essentially has been done is they've provided ownership interest to villagers in Zimbabwe, and that is helping to save them. Prior to that, you had communal lands in Zimbabwe. The villagers...
You had the government saying, don't kill the elephants.
Don't kill the elephants. The villagers were growing crops, put livestock on those communal lands, and the elephants were coming through and destroying those crops, and other wildlife was running off their livestock. The villagers didn't have any interest in protecting wildlife.
So when the poachers came, they would just look the other way. Go ahead, kill the...
They would look the other way. Then what happened is villagers were allowed to start getting proceeds from trophy hunts and from safari tourism that came through there. And all of a sudden, the wildlife became an asset. They hired their own game wardens. Wildlife habitat actually doubled because now the wildlife was a benefit to the villagers. And as a result, the elephant population also doubled over a period of 13 years.
And why do you know about this? You're with PERC, stands for?
Property and Environment Research Center.
Which is based in Bozeman, Montana, and you folks study areas where private property can help protect animals?
Absolutely. We believe that ownership provides the best incentives for conservation.
And most of the buffalo now are owned by private ranchers, but there are still some in state parks, or one state park, and one has a roundup.
One has a roundup, and they're actually treating their bison most like private ranchers are treating their bison. They're making their bison pay. And what they do is once a year, for 45 years, they have this huge roundup where they bring in their 1,500 bison, and tourists come from all over the world, pay money to watch these bison get